Well, hello, and thank you for joining the Create Program Workshop. My name is Stephanie Vose. I'm the Emergency Services and Workforce Program Specialist at the Colorado Rural Health Center. And during this presentation, I'm going to go over what the Create Grant Reimbursement Program is and just some frequently asked questions about the program and how to apply. So we'll go ahead and get started. All right, well, here we have an agenda of everything that's going to be covered during this presentation. First, I'll provide an overview of what the Create Grant Program is, various eligibility requirements, and also requirements for the program and the application. Then we're going to get into some of the standard course allowances and ineligible and eligible expenses under Create. We'll discuss the financial waiver application process, as well as the general application process. And then we'll go over some tips for success and common mistakes. So what is CREATE? CREATE stands for the Colorado Resource for Emergency and Trauma Education. It's a reimbursement grant program that assists organizations in improving and expanding the EMTS system in Colorado through EMS and trauma education. These can be public or private organizations, urban or rural. And CREATE is a funding partnership with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment through Senate Bill 34. Here I've listed out the eligibility requirements for the CREATE grant program. First, applicants must have as their purpose the provision of emergency medical and trauma services in Colorado. The second is CREATE funds urban and rural EMTS agencies for education and training of service providers working in Colorado only. Individuals cannot apply for CREATE, and I'll come back to that. Third, agencies must have an updated oath organizational profile dated within the last 3 months. We'll touch on that later in the presentation. And lastly, the application must demonstrate the ability to provide a 50% cash match. And here at the bottom, it says that a standard 50% cash match may be reduced if a financial waiver application is submitted and approved. And the cash match may not be from state funds from HUTF EMS account. So I mentioned that individuals cannot apply for CREATE. This is because the CREATE program assists EMS and trauma organizations, not individuals. An individual provider, even if they intend to participate in the requested training as well, can write the CREATE application as long as they're submitting the application under the agency where they work or volunteer. It's important to note, however, that the responses to application questions should be written from the agency's perspective, not in first person. The application must demonstrate the need of the agency and community for the requested training and how the agency and community is expected to benefit from the requested training, not how an individual person would benefit. CREATE is not designed for individuals who simply have a personal desire to receive training. There must be an illustrated need for the agency and community to justify the training. For example, if an EMT wants to advance to paramedic out of personal desire, but the agency and community is already saturated with paramedics, the need and benefit of training another provider is less justifiable. Here we have the program and application requirements. So it's important to note that CREATE operates on a monthly basis. There's an application deadline every month. If you're applying for a financial waiver, you must submit that along with the general application at the same time for the same deadline. It's also important to note that each application deadline has its own eligible course start date range, and I'll show you what I mean by that in just a moment. If your application gets denied, you're encouraged to reapply if the course start date still falls within the eligible range of future deadlines. And then all expenses approved for CREATE reimbursement must be incurred after the approval letter date. So you have to wait for the review committee to score your application and receive your scores back in an official approval letter. So the date on that, all expenses can't be incurred before that date, only after. Going back to what I mentioned about the application deadlines and the eligible course start date ranges, I wanted to show you where to find this on the website. And also other important documents that are related to the application program and the guidelines, etc. So The website is coruralhealth.org/create, and this will take you to the Create webpage. As you can see, the guidelines are right up here at the top. You can start the application process here, and the Attend a Live Q&A will show you the Q&A schedule, which happen on a monthly basis. So if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see right here on the right side, Create Deadlines and Course Start Dates, and you'll want to click the application deadlines and course start dates here. This will take you to the schedule of deadlines. So on the left side, you'll see these in yellow are the various deadlines for both the financial waiver and general application. Again, they must be submitted at the same time during the same deadline. And then on this side, you'll see the eligible course start date ranges that I was mentioning. So for example, if you wanted to submit an application by the July 5th deadline, the earliest the course you're requesting could start is on August 17th. And the latest the course could start is December 18th. So any time in between these two dates or on these exact dates would be eligible for this specific deadline. Now let's discuss what types of training and education you can apply for under CREATE and what expenses are eligible and ineligible under the program. The CREATE grant program has maximum funding allowances for standard courses and will pay no more than 50% of the maximum allowance. The maximum amount awarded per course is based on the standard 50-50 match of approved courses. CREATE can cover more than 50% if a financial waiver application is submitted and approved. Once I get through some of these details, I'll show you where to find the standard course list and we can review it briefly. The allowances include tuition, books, and allowable fees for all courses. National Registry exam costs are also included in the maximum allowances for applicable courses. These courses will have NR following the title of the course and require successful completion of the exam in order to receive reimbursement. In addition to the standard course costs, applicants can also request reasonable lodging and travel costs. Mileage reimbursement is limited to the current two-wheel drive mileage rate on the Colorado Office of State Controller website. Lodging may be requested at the most economical rate per night. The CREATE standard course list is not all-inclusive, and selecting a course from this list does not automatically qualify an applicant for a funding award. Courses other than those listed will be considered if the course content applies specifically to emergency medical and trauma services and reflects appropriate and reasonable costs. Applicants are required to provide a course syllabus for any course not included in the standard course list. Before we check out the course list, I'd like to highlight that applicants may apply for out-of-state courses and conferences, but you must meet at least one of three criteria and provide a strong and convincing justification of need. The first of these criteria is the requested course or conference is not available in Colorado. The application must include strong and convincing justification of need and must clearly demonstrate the conference or course offers unique educational content and it will not be offered in Colorado in the foreseeable future. In addition, the application must include significant letters of support from the community expected to benefit from the education and local emergency medical and trauma services leadership. The second criteria is the requested course or conference is not available in Colorado within the required time frame. In addition to strong and convincing justification of need, the application must demonstrate the conference or course is required to comply with a regulatory mandate. The application must include a specific citation from a document prepared by a regulatory body requiring that the course of instruction be completed by a specific date. The last criteria is it is significantly more cost-effective to attend an out-of-state course or conference. In addition to strong and convincing justification of need, the application must include specific costs comparing the cost to attend the course in-state versus out-of-state. Before we check out, all right, let's check out the standard course allowance list. As you can see, we're back on the Create webpage of the Colorado Rural Health Center website. If you scroll down a bit, you'll see this overview of standard course allowances. You're going to click that and then click the link here that appears in the drop-down. And now we're here in the overview of the standard allowances. Most of everything that's in this first page of the document we've already covered. You'll see these criteria for out-of-state conferences and courses. And then now we're getting into the maximum amounts Create will pay towards various standard courses. So in the total cost column here, this represents what Create deems as the maximum amount a standard course should cost. This amount includes tuition, books, and allowable fees built into it. In the column next to it, you'll see this is the Create share, which represents the standard 50-50 match that Create would cover. I had mentioned that some courses require successful completion of the National Registry exam, and those were noted with the NR after the course title. So you can see those here for EMR, Advanced EMT, EMT, Paramedic, etc. Again, the National Registry exam fee is built into the standard course allowance. And then lastly, all costs over and above these maximum amounts will be paid by the grantee. In the event the actual cost of the training is less than this listed amount, enter the actual cost of the course into your grant application. Before we dive into the financial waiver and general applications, I wanted to show you where you can find the guidelines and also see the eligible and ineligible uses of Create funding. So if you can see we're on the Create webpage. If you just scroll down a bit, you'll see the grant guide and application instructions. You can also access this by clicking the orange button right here. And then you'll see below that is the financial waiver guide and application as well, so you can review that. So I'm going to open up the grant guide. And this document is totally navigable. So that means you can click on these page numbers to jump to that page, and then there's buttons to return to the table of contents. So let's go see the eligible and ineligible uses of Create funds. It's going to be on page 6. So again, you can read all of these eligible course costs here, and these have all been factored into that standard course allowance. You'll see here that reasonable travel and lodging may be requested. And then if you go down, you'll see these are the ineligible uses of Create funds. So various things cannot be covered under Create, including uniforms and shoes, vaccinations, drug screenings, PPE, background checks, etc. So you can review this on your own time, but I just wanted to make sure I went over that with you. I had mentioned previously with respect to the program and application eligibility requirements that agencies must have an updated oath organizational profile within the last 3 months. So I'm going to touch on that here. So we're still in the guidelines, and if you go to starting the application on page 10, that's where we're gonna go to. And so create or update your oath organizational profile. A current oath organizational profile is required for all agencies listed in a single or multi-agency application and is a prerequisite to accessing the grant application. The profile status must show updated with a certification date within the last 3 months. This is not the education program recognition gatekeeper process. And here you'll see it says reference this oath instructional for guidance. This is all managed by CDPHE, so unfortunately I can't provide or offer much support when it comes to creating or updating this profile, but there is a great instructional here. So we're going to click that, and you'll see it's pretty self-explanatory. You can go through this on your own time, but it just outlines the process if you need to create one or update one, how to establish who the profile gatekeeper is, and then your main contact for the oath organizational profile is going to be Andre Smith, so you can reach out to him by phone here or email. So we're about to jump into the applications associated with Create, but I wanted to go over these items to consider before starting the application. So first, I always encourage applicants to apply 2 to 3 months before the course start date. As I mentioned, in the event your application gets denied, just making sure your course start date still falls in the eligible start date range for future deadlines. You need to get your oath organizational profile created or updated. Of course, review the grant guidelines and blank application templates. They should be in your confirmation emails with the pre-application steps, but if you need one, just reach out to me and I can send that over. Data, data, data. Plan to provide facts and statistics that support and justify your request. This is very important to the reviewers. And connect early with your finance and accounting personnel at your agency, especially as it relates to that financial needs section at the end. You're going to really need some help with them interpreting your financial statements and determining what your financial outlook looks like, etc. So definitely get in touch with them because that's a very important section of the application. And then attend a live Q&A. We host monthly live Q&As for Create, and they're just an open forum discussion where new or prospective or current Create applicants can come and ask questions, learn more about the program, receive some one-on-one feedback. People who attend those, I host them. Also, we usually have some of the reviewers attend, and RETAC coordinators are also invited. To start the application process with Create, the first thing you need to do is submit a contact form. So if you remember going back to the Create webpage, there were some orange buttons at the top, and one of those says Start the Application Process. If you click that, it will take you to the contact form. So it's just general contact information there. Then you'll receive a confirmation email with the next pre-application step that you need to complete, and that is submitting the vendor form. So in that, you will provide your agency's W-9 and fill out all associated vendor information. Once those two steps are completed, and I have verified that you have an updated organizational oath profile, then I personally will send you your personal grant ID and the link to both of the applications. Now we're finally ready to start diving into the applications for Create, and we're going to start off with the financial waiver application. So as I've mentioned throughout this presentation, entities can apply for a financial waiver to reduce the standard match from 50% to no less than 10%. What this means is either the standard match for Create is 50%, so Create covers 50% and the agency provides the other 50%. But with a financial waiver application, you can request Create, the maximum is for Create to cover 90% and the agency only has to cover 10%. So those are your options, anywhere between 50 to 10%. Financial waiver applications must accompany a general application. They have to be submitted at the same time for the same deadline in the same month cycle. In the event your financial waiver application is denied, which those applications are reviewed prior to the general applications, if your financial waiver is denied, then your general application is omitted from review. So unfortunately, you're going to have to start the application process all over the next month. Another good reason to apply early, 2 to 3 months before the course starts, so that if it gets denied, you have time to reapply. To receive access to the financial waiver application, you must first complete the contact form and the W-9 vendor form associated with the general application. So there's two prerequisite steps to starting any application in Create, and the first one is going to be a contact form, and then you'll get a confirmation email with the next pre-application step, which is to provide your agency's W-9 and vendor information. I'd like to point out that applicants are responsible for providing specific details to justify financial need by demonstrating the financial hardship that led to their choice. why the applicant cannot meet the required 50% match, as well as providing the required financial statements. Do not include any information about the proposed use of Create grant funds in your financial waiver application. This application is based strictly on financial need only. Now we're finally ready to start. Continuing on with a financial waiver application, you'll see here these are going to be the questions that you're going to be asked. And there's up to 10 points maximum that you can get on this application, and you must receive a score of a 6.1 or higher to pass the financial waiver review. So the first question says, describe the financial situation of the entity that justifies the need for a waiver. For the reviewers, they're going to score you based off if the narrative justifies waiving the 50% cash match. The second question says, describe entity's capital expenditures proposed in the financial documents attached and provide the purpose for cash and cash equivalent accounts. So reviewers are going to question if the applicant's current financial status or explanation consistent with the narrative. Is the inability to provide 50% cash match demonstrated? And then the last question, describe any austerity measures that have been implemented to reduce costs. And what reviewers are going to be looking for here is, has the applicant provided information that indicates a good faith effort has been put forth to obtain a cash match? Let's now move on to the general Create application. Here on this slide, you'll see that this is the narrative scoring summary and the total points available for each section. So there's 6 different sections in the application. One is dedicated to service need. One is dedicated to cost effectiveness. There's priority to underdeveloped or age system components, applicant qualifications, system integration, and financial need. Applicants must achieve a score of 70 or higher to receive approval. Considering that applicants must receive a score of 70 or higher to receive approval, I usually recommend that applicants focus on the service needs section. That's 40 points. I also recommend the cost effectiveness section, 15 points, and the financial needs section, another 15 points. These 3 sections, if you received a perfect score, would get you to that 70 score to receive approval. Before we get into the specific questions in each section of the application, I wanted to point you to somewhere really helpful in the grant guidelines that should help you be able to write your responses within the application. So as you can see here, we're back in the grant guidelines. You're going to scroll down, and within the table of contents, the narrative sections and scoring. So that's on page 12. So again, we have that overview of all the sections and their point allocation here. And then it goes into each section and each question, and there's these really helpful suggested content pieces that were curated from all the review committee members and etc. So this should be able to give you some good points to jump off from in your narrative responses while you're writing them. So this goes over every question and gives you some suggested content. The first section of the application is dedicated to service need. The first question asks, describe how the requested education benefits the applicant agency and community served. Describe how education targets the EMTS system. So what the reviewers are going to be looking for this question is data or other information that demonstrates the need for the training. They're going to be looking for examples of patients that are not served, shifts that are not covered, patients that were referred to another agency to receive care, or any other reason that the additional training or the additional trained providers are needed. The reviewers are going to be looking for you to explain how the requested training will make things better than they currently are. So that's a pretty good overview of the first question. The second question asks you to describe the current level of service how the requested training upgrades or maintains current level of service, and the job duties and requirements of participants. So the review committee is going to be looking for you to explain why and how the requested number of participants was determined, and explain the necessity to train the requested number of providers and the benefit of the requested training. The reviewers are not familiar with your organization, so you should provide pertinent information to describe the current level of service, such as the size and population of the area served, EMTS call volume or patient load, number and levels of current providers, level of staffing, minimum credentials required for providers, and why. They also want you to provide specific examples of how the requested training is needed to maintain the current level of service or how it will make things better. Explain how your organization will have enough people to cover open shifts, or the current staff will not have to work as much overtime to cover. And you should clearly demonstrate that the eligible participants are EMTS providers or will be EMTS providers for the initial courses. The next question asks you to explain how the requested training addresses a system deficiency or unmet service need in the community served. So you'll need to identify a specific system deficiency or unmet service need, and you state it to illustrate how the training will help address the deficiency or unmet service need. For example, how many providers does the agency have and why are more needed? Or how many providers need continuing education credits to stay certified, and how the training will meet that requirement. The last question in the service needs section asks you to describe how the requested education enhances collaboration with local partners and stakeholders, and how their support ensures course success. So what this question is asking you to do is describe your current relationships and collaboration efforts with local partners and stakeholders, and explain how the training will benefit those relationships, enhance collaboration, and strengthen the overall EMTS system. You should illustrate the importance of partner and stakeholder support in ensuring course success, and demonstrate that support with letters from them that address the specific project. The next section in the application is for cost effectiveness, and the first question asked is to describe alternatives considered and why the requested training is the best option. This question is asking you to provide a thorough evaluation of alternatives that includes comparative costs and consideration of additional cost factors, such as travel and lodging, course location, is it in person versus online, the quality of the training, timelines, etc. You should describe at least 3 alternatives considered. For example, an initial training course should consider a program offered by a community college, a program offered by a hospital-based program, and an online or hybrid program. Requests for continuing education should look at alternatives like online courses or different providers of similar content. There may be only one state conference, but that does not mean that a regional or hospital conference won't provide the same content or number of training hours in a different format. You will need to identify all the costs associated with each alternative and explain why the selected training is the best solution. It's okay to consider intangibles like time away from work or a shorter completion time. The next question asks you to list all the costs of the requested education and explain why the costs are necessary to complete the training. You're going to need to describe the cost associated with total cost per student. This includes tuition, required course fees, including the National Registry fee, cost of books, and backup information related to travel and lodging if applicable. Backup for travel and lodging includes starting and ending locations, cost-saving efforts considered such as carpooling and shared lodging, and how estimates were calculated and determined, and be sure to include any relevant attachments. There's only one question for the underdeveloped or age system component section, which asks how the requested education addresses components of an underdeveloped or aged EMTS system component in the applicant community. An example of an age system component could be, we will lose half our staff to retirements in the next 2 years. You'd then need to identify how the training will address this specific issue, such as, we need to train 6 EMTs to replace the retirees. An example of an underdeveloped system component could be, we provide BLS first response and are upgrading to ALS transport. You'd then identify how the training addresses this. For example, we need to send 6 EMTs to paramedic training to have the necessary staff to operate an ALS ambulance service 24/7. Not all applicants necessarily have an underdeveloped or aged system component. Some are very robust and highly developed. In this case, you're encouraged to reiterate how the requested training will maintain the current EMTS system. All right, we're halfway through the Create application, which leads us to the 4th section, Applicant Qualifications. So the first question asks you to explain how the agency has the administrative capability and financial resources available to manage a reimbursement grant of this duration and dollar amount requested. So given the project duration, timeline to reimbursement, and dollar amount requested, describe how your agency has enough working capital to administer the project without impairing regular operations, considering all costs must be paid for in full prior to reimbursement when the course has been completed. You should illustrate how the agency will ensure successful completion of the requested training and comply with all the Create requirements. If you have experience with other reimbursement grant programs, describe it and demonstrate that you met all the requirements of the grant. The second question states, explain how applicant entity intends to support continued competency of trained providers and maintain future service levels without grant support. For this question, reviewers want you to describe your plans to support the trained providers. These include things like opportunities for mentorship, complying with continuing education requirements, professional development, etc., and explain your plans to maintain service levels in the future without grant support. Section 5, System Integration. The first question asks you to describe how the proposed education integrates with other services in the community and improves continuity of patient care. You're going to need to describe how the requested training will integrate into the overall healthcare and public safety systems serving your community. Explain how the requested training will improve continuity of patient care across these systems. This could include less reliance on partner agencies for care or transport, and thus less strain on the system. It could also mean your agency is able to provide more support to partners and the community, which could also lessen strain on the system. In either case, the continuity of patient care would be improved. Using present data and projected data is a good way to illustrate the expected system improvements that would result from completing the requested training. This second question often trips some applicants up, and it asks you to describe how the requested training isn't duplicative of other efforts within the area. What this question's asking you is to describe how bringing students to the requested level will not saturate the system with similar providers within the agency or community. You'll need to demonstrate that education or training that provides the same or similar content is not offered in your area or within a similar distance if the training occurs outside your community. All right, the 6th and final section is financial need. This is definitely the section that most applicants have the most trouble with, and it's also why I encourage you early on in the application process to connect with your accounting and finance personnel as soon as possible to help you collect the right financial statements and also to answer these questions. So the first question asks you to explain why the requested education requires funding assistance. For multi-agency requests, you'll also need to explain any participating agency's financial need and include their financial statements as well. But for this, reviewers expect you to make specific references to your agency's financial statements, such as line items and dollar amounts. You will need to explain any surpluses or deficits, cash balances, and training budgets, and illustrate why the applicant entity cannot fund the requested training without assistance. Don't just say it's not in the budget. Your narrative needs to show that the funds are not elsewhere in your organization without compromising your ability to provide required services. If you have large fund balances or cash on hand, you'll need to explain why these funds cannot be used to fund the course. Make specific references to the financial statements. For example, identify the fund balance, where it is on your financial statement, and why it cannot be used for this education. The next question asks you to describe your agency's current financial status and provide clear explanations of what's illustrated in the required financial statements. So again, like the first question, reviewers are going to expect you to make clear and specific references to your financial statements, such as those line items and dollar amounts. So for this, you're going to need to explain your agency's current financial status, illustrate your agency's expectation of future financial status based on current status, and how current and future financial status will support the trained providers and maintain future service levels. In other words, you're going to need to explain your financial statements by describing what they show and what they don't show. Everyone has a balance sheet, an income statement, and a budget, but everyone does not use the exact same names for accounts and does not provide the exact same services. You'll need to explain what the numbers mean in the context of your organization and refer to specific figures when explaining your finances. The reviewers can read a financial statement, but don't leave it up to them to interpret what each number represents at your agency. It's up to you to explain it. All right, we've made it to the last question of the Create application and the last question in the financial needs section. So this question asks you to clearly describe the source of the required cash match. You'll need to explain what funds the applicant will use to cover the training. Please note that there are a number of ineligible sources that do not qualify as eligible sources of the required cash match. These ineligible sources include the value of existing infrastructure, other forms of in-kind services, state funds from the HUTF EMS account, RETAC funding, and/or CREATE grants awarded to other agencies. You'll need to provide a general description of the source of your cash match and demonstrate that it does not come from any of the ineligible sources that I just mentioned. If it comes from your general fund budget and your agency is funded by patient charges and taxes, then say so in your response to this question. If the agency has no funding at all to support the training, the cash match could come from the participants of the training themselves. They could cover 100% of the cost, and once completed and the agency receives the CREATE funds, the agency could then reimburse the providers 50% of what they paid. There is some documentation that you're required to attach to your CREATE application. The first one being your agency's financial statements. So you need to provide an income statement for the previous completed fiscal year. So if you're submitting an application in 2023, this would mean that we would need an income statement that shows January 1, 2022 for the year ending December 31st, 2022. Income statements can also be referred to as a statement of activities, a profit and loss statement, or a statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in net position. The balance sheet you're required to provide is also for the previously completed fiscal year. So again, if you're applying in 2023, this would be for January 1, 2022 through December 31st, 2022. Balance sheets can also be referred to as a statement of net assets, a statement of net position, etc. And then we also need a budget sheet for the entire current fiscal year. So if you're applying in 2023, this would be for January 1, 2023 through December 31st, 2023. It's important to note that these financial statements do not have to be audited. CREATE accepts unaudited versions of these financial statements. If you're submitting a multi-agency request, you're also required to provide letters of support and financial statements for any participating agency if they're intended to be covered under CREATE. Reach out to me if you want some more information about multi-agency requests. It's also outlined pretty good in the guidelines, so you can reference that. If you're requesting mileage and lodging, you're also required to provide kind of a screenshot or documentation of Google Maps or something that shows the starting and ending location for mileage. Again, that's at the 2-wheel drive rate. And then lodging estimates, screenshots of booking estimates on their websites, etc. If you're having trouble or confused by the required financial statements for the Create application, you can find some examples of these statements on the Create webpage. So we're here on the Create webpage. If you scroll down a bit, you'll see examples of required financial statements. When you click on this, there's 3 links for each of the financial statements, which I already have pulled up here. So here's the income statement example. Obviously, it can also be called a profit and loss budget overview. It can be called a statement of activities, etc. Those are all listed over here. And then it describes what's required for the Create application. So when we say it needs to be the most recently completed fiscal year, it needs to be for the year before. So if you're applying in 2023, the income statement and the balance sheet both need to be from the last fiscal year. So that would be January 1 through December 31st of 2022. And then we have our balance sheet example here, kind of the same thing. The references to how the document could also be titled, and the reiteration here of the time frame we need that for, and then the same for the budget. So I hope this is helpful for you. There are some optional attachments that you can include with your Create application, which include letters of support, service area maps, quotes for purchases related to the course, pertinent conference registration forms and brochures, a syllabus, etc. While letters of support are not required, they're certainly highly encouraged, and we recommend you getting letters of support from medical directors, local government officials, community members, surrounding and partner agencies, and also your RETAC coordinators. Some tips for success when submitting your Create application. Some of these things I've already mentioned quite frequently throughout this presentation, but they're worth mentioning again. Of course, apply at least 2 to 3 months before the course start date. As I mentioned, that gives you enough leeway. If it gets denied, you have time to reapply. Connect with your finance and accounting personnel as early as possible. They're going to be able to help get you the correct financial statements and also help you answer those financial need questions at the end of the application. You're really going to need their support on that. Make clear references to data in financial statements and provide documentation to support any claim that you make in your Create application. It's also recommended that you request a third-party review your application before submitting. Sometimes having someone who has no background or experience in EMS or trauma is a great person to have review your application because they're going into it completely blind. And if they can understand your request and your need and the benefit, then that's good for your application. And then, of course, attend a monthly live Q&A session. Those are always great to just get more support and feedback. I'm going to wrap this presentation up by going over some common mistakes that people make when writing their Create application. So one of them is that applicants provide brief narratives that don't directly address application questions. You should make sure that you understand what the question is asking and provide a clear and specific response. Another mistake is copy and pasting narratives from one question to another. Though it may seem like some questions are very similar in what they're asking, do not copy and paste narratives from one question to another. Reviewers definitely notice this, and it reflects poorly on the applicant. Another mistake is providing a lack of specific explanation and or references to financial statements and supporting data. I can't stress enough how important it is to connect early with your accounting and finance personnel. Most of the time, the person responsible for writing the Create application has little to no knowledge about the financial operations at their agency or how to interpret and explain their financial statements. This can lead to a lack of explanation and references. Because we're dealing with grant dollars, it's important for reviewers to understand the financial need of an agency. Another common mistake is the applicant provides insufficient evaluation of alternatives without comparative costs. As I mentioned in the cost effectiveness slide, you're encouraged to provide at least 3 alternatives and analyze the costs associated with them, such as the course costs, travel costs, time away from work, etc. Some applicants will just mention that they researched other options and determined their option is the best, without listing what those other options were and their associated costs. Another mistake is weak reference to how education integrates into the overall healthcare and public safety systems in the region, or why the education is needed. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Another one is the lack of sufficient supporting facts and statistics. It's important to provide specific data and sources of information throughout your application. While national data is okay, reviewers are more interested in data that's specific to Colorado and specific to your region. When referencing data, it's important to cite where the information was obtained so reviewers understand the credibility of the source. And then the last common mistake I have here to outline is that the applicant did not demonstrate having the experience, administrative infrastructure, and/or financial resources to manage the grant. You should consider if you have enough working capital to fund and administer the training, since reimbursement doesn't come at the beginning. It comes after all costs have been paid and will only reimburse towards students who take and pass the training. Working capital is the capital of a business which is used in its day-to-day operations, calculated as the current assets minus the current liabilities. Unsure what your working capital is? Be sure to connect early with your finance and accounting personnel. Thank you for taking time to watch this presentation. I hope you found it helpful in navigating the CREATE program. I'm always happy to provide assistance, so feel free to connect with me if you have any questions or would like additional support.